Hi folks, welcome to this video on arteriovenous difference, also known as a-vo2 diff, a topic that strikes fear into all your hearts because of one thing: it's letters and numbers together. It looks complicated straight away, so we start to panic. It is not. It is dead straightforward. It is dead easy. Apologies for my diagram. It is hideous, I know, but there you go. I'm not an art teacher. Okay, this, believe it or not, is a muscle. They're the tendons at either end, and this is, the artery that is providing blood to the muscles, and here is the vein that is carrying blood away from the muscles back to the heart. Obviously, it is not to scale. You are not going to have an artery this big going to a muscle that small and a vein that big leaving it, but it's just a diagrammatic representation. Right, first and foremost, what is arteriovenous difference, or a-vo2 diff? So there it is at the top. There's the definition just there. It's the difference in oxygen content of arterial and venous blood. So arterial blood, blood in the artery. Venous blood, venous meaning vein, blood in the vein. So basically, what is a-vo2 diff? It's the difference in oxygen levels between arterial and venous blood, right? What the hell does that mean? Okay, blood flowing to the muscles is full of oxygen, because this is the blood, remember, that has come from the heart and lungs. So it's picked up all of its fresh oxygen, and it is now picked up by hemoglobin, the red blood cells, and is now well on its way towards the muscle, where the muscle is going to use it. But here's the thing: at rest, this muscle is not very active, so it is not using a lot of oxygen because it doesn't need to. Why use something if you don't need to use it? So actually, quite a lot of the blood that comes out of the muscle via the vein, blood that is in the vein, i.e. venous blood, quite a lot of it is still carrying oxygen. So I've done a diagram here showing that, look, 4 units of oxygen are entering the muscle, 3 are leaving. So the muscle is only using 1 unit of oxygen. Okay? So the difference in oxygen content of arterial and venous blood at rest is quite small. There is not much difference between the oxygen content of arterial blood versus venous blood at rest. So as I've just put at the bottom there, at rest, the a-vo2 diff is low. There is a low difference between, or very small difference between the oxygen content of arterial blood versus that of venous blood. Okay? So what happens during exercise? Well, the following happens during exercise. If you look at the arterial blood now, because we're exercising and we're breathing more oxygen in, we're diffusing more oxygen into the blood. More oxygen is getting into the blood, so the amount of oxygen in an artery has massively increased because we're exercising now. But crucially, the muscle, now that it's active, now that it's contracting, is using more and more of the oxygen. So now the oxygen content of the vein, that is going to decrease. So there's going to be less oxygen coming out of that muscle in the vein because the muscle is using a hell of a lot more oxygen for exercise. Okay? That is to say, now during exercise, okay, a-vo2 diff increases. Okay, there should be, I missed an S off the end there, apologies for that, but there's an increase in a-vo2 diff, i.e. there is now a lot more oxygen in the artery compared to what there is in the vein. So that is a-vo2 diff. How much oxygen is in the blood in the artery compared to how much is in the vein? At rest, there is a low difference. The oxygen content of the artery is very similar. You're always going to have more in the artery because the blood is always using some oxygen. But as you start to exercise, this muscle is going to use more oxygen, which means you're going to get more into the blood anyway because you're naturally diffusing more oxygen into the blood at the lungs. So the artery is going to get packed full of blood, and now there's going to be even less blood coming out in the vein because the muscle is using more of it. So how would we attack it if a question came up on it? To be honest, it hasn't come up too much, this, but it's, so that, does it mean it's due? Possibly. a-vo2 diff. A typical question that's come up in the past has been the one above. During a game, a player's a-vo2 diff will increase. First thing we need to notice there is they've acknowledged the fact that there is now a greater difference in oxygen content between an artery and a vein at exercise. So we're not going to get a mark for that. They've said it in the question, so that's something that we need to be aware of when we're reading these questions. What is the significance of this increase? I.e., what does it basically mean? Right, what are we always going to get a mark for doing? We are always going to get a mark for giving a good definition. So for the 3 marks available, there's number 1. Okay? Difference between oxygen content of arterial and venous blood. Why am I getting a mark for that? Look, it hasn't given you a definition of it in the question. So you're always going to get a mark for giving a definition of it in your answer. So number 1, there's a tick. I've got 1 out of 3 so far. More oxygen is being used by the muscle. That is essentially why the a-vo2 diff has increased. If the muscle has used more oxygen, there's less oxygen coming out in the vein, in the venous blood. So there's mark number 2 out of 3. Another reason why a-vo2 diff is increasing is what we showed on the diagram. When you're exercising, your arteries are naturally going to be holding more oxygenated blood, because when you start exercising, you're going to be diffusing more oxygen into your blood at the lungs. So why is a-vo2 diff increasing as well? Because the arteries naturally going to be holding more oxygen. And therefore the vein will naturally be holding less because the muscle's using it more. So again, that's another reason why a-vo2 diff is going to increase. Let's put a couple of insurance marks down there. Marks that points that you're always going to get marks for. Believe it or not, you're also going to get a mark for saying that. Who's the only athletes that's going to benefit from a-vo2 diff increasing? Endurance-based events, where you need to use oxygen to perform. Sprinters ain't going to benefit from it. Shot putters aren't going to benefit from it. It's about endurance-based events. So that's always worth a mark as well. And finally, believe it or not, you even get a mark for saying, well, pardon my way of putting it, but duh, yeah. If my muscles are using more oxygen, if I'm delivering more oxygen via the arterial blood to the muscles, and the muscles are using more oxygen, so there's less oxygen coming out in the vein, it shows that I'm going to have an improved performance because my muscles are using more oxygen to produce their energy and function effectively. So there are plenty of ways to get marks on this question. So a-vo2 diff, when a question comes up, top tips, always open with a definition. It's the difference between oxygen content of arterial and venous blood, okay? As if they don't mention it in the question, they have in this one, what happens during exercise? a-vo2 diff increases. Why? Because the muscle is using more of the oxygen, so there is less blood coming out in the vein, okay? Why else is it increasing? Because the artery is naturally holding more oxygen, because we're diffusing more into the blood at the site of the lungs. It's going to benefit endurance and stamina events, and it's going to lead to an improved performance in those events. Hope you found this useful, folks. Use it to complete the tasks in your workbooks, and good luck with it.